Pro wrestling talk from the four corners of parts unknown. This is That Wrestling Podcast.
Welcome to That Wrestling Podcast. It is the first episode. Welcome. So this is a podcast spawned from a group text message from me and three of my friends. I am Jason Marchuka, and with me is Brian Christie, who I've known the longest. Brian, what's up, man?
What's up, guys?
JT, a.k.a. Joe. What's up, dude?
Hey, nothing much, man. How you doing?
And Kevin, hello. How are you? What's up?
Oh, man. How are you guys doing tonight?
So the four of us all worked at the same shitty radio station about 15 years ago. And before we get into what this podcast is about, I figured we would talk a little bit about how we became friends. Brian and I have known each other the longest. We worked in Pittsburgh at a radio station. We both worked the overnight shift when you had to play CDs and cart commercials. And we would just talk on the phone about, music and wrestling and all that stuff. And then here we are 20 years later. Brian was the best man at my wedding, and I am the godfather of his daughter. And Brian then went to Michigan, where he worked with Joe and Kevin. Now, when I worked in Michigan with Brian and Joe and Kevin, I didn't really know Joe that well or Kevin. So, Brian, let's talk about how you got to know Brian and Joe.
Well, I'm Brian, so I got from the very get-go. July 4, 1979, I was all about it. But as far as Kevin and Joe go, I moved to Michigan February 2004, and Kevin worked on my station. Joe worked in promotions, so sooner or later after that, the ball got rolling. And I really can't pinpoint when, in the discussions between Kevin and Joe and myself that we became into wrestling. I don't remember that happening. I don't know if maybe a show was coming around and we had tickets, or I don't know if you guys have any recollection of that, but all of a sudden it's I can remember moving to Michigan, kind of meeting you guys, and then being at Buffalo Wild Wings for Sunday pay-per-views. And there's some blanks in the middle there somewhere that I just don't remember really now.
Joe, what is your early memory of meeting Brian, and do you remember how the wrestling conversation started?
I kind of remember how wrestling came about. Yes, Brian, Kevin, Jason, you guys were all at the rock station, and I was doing, we all know for small town radio, I was doing promotions and sports talk at the same time.
Yeah,
so you
right.
had to wear two different hats or three different hats, and commercial work and traffic and all that stuff. So I was pretty much doing everything for the sports talk station. And where it came about was basically whenever there was the Friday afternoon at either the Holiday Inn or whatever the remote was, like Reno's, we would just hang out and have a couple drinks and start talking about wrestling. Don't know how it came up. I think it was because we had house show tickets at one of the arenas by us and parts unknown. And then it just came about we just started talking about wrestling and realized that we need to go to B-dubs every pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. And it just grew from there. But the funny thing is, Kevin graduated with my younger cousin. So we found that out at my wedding. Kevin was at my wedding and my cousin was there, and it's they knew each other in high school. So it's we were two towns apart the entire time. So that was a small world right there. What do you think, Kevin?
I think when, without even talking about being fans of wrestling, I feel like you could just look at us, at one another, and just be like, this guy's like me. Kind of nerdy.
We're oozing machismo.
We're oozing machismo. We just hold ourselves with such great confidence. But I don't know. I just feel like there's a certain type of nerd potential or percentage, that you just were that dude probably likes wrestling. Not in a bad way. It's almost like you dig it. You know what I mean? It's auto connection.
Yeah.
Within time.
I think it's pretty safe to say that I'm probably the most hardcore fan out of the four of us. And I don't mean that in barbed wire and bats and tables. I think, I pay attention to, wrestling from Japan and Mexico, and I love the indies. But of course, the majority of this podcast will be about WWE, AEW, and NXT. But don't fret. We are not going to leave Ring of Honor and Impact and all those other groups and the independents. We're not going to ignore that. But a lot of it will be about the big boys. But my big thing about pro wrestling, I love the merch. I am a huge merch king. I love the T-shirts. I got figures and memorabilia, and I've been given belts over the years. Yeah, belts, not titles.
Wow, Vince's edict.
I'm the big shirt guy here, and what's fun over the course of the planning process of this podcast, I've turned you guys into wrestling shirt guys, and I think Kevin, you're the biggest convert, I think, out of the three of you.
Yeah, I definitely agree to that. When I start going on, Hot Topic, Pro Wrestling Tees, WWE Shop, multiple places, and each week, I think there's a good 3 or 4 straight weeks, I at least got like 2 or 3 shirts, and it was like, oh, I just picked up a dozen in the last month. But there's such good deals, and with AEW and so many things, there's so many guys that I want to walk around representing their clothes because I like watching them on TV.
And Joe, you kind of not as bad as Kevin, but I know occasionally I'll get that email. Hey, look at these, and I'm like, Hot Topic podcast, 30% off.
Yeah, I had to do it. It's getting sad that before we started talking about doing this, I think I had 8 to 10 wrestling shirts, period. And from the beginning of 2021 till now, I've bought 8 more. So I've already doubled my T-shirt collection. And Jason, you and I are both pop vinyl guys. So of course I have all of those too. And yeah, the merch is going up a little bit more, and the respect for my wife is going down with each with each purchase I make. She's like, really? You're still doing this? You're still doing this? And it's like, well, I have to. It's for the show.
Well, just tell her. My line is, it's not going up my nose, and it's not going in a G-string. That's where the money's not going. So
to that point, Jay, I like that you said that the email coming through from Joe will say, hey, look at these, and it ain't talking that shows how the fandom really runs deep with us. It's totally legit.
Brian, the least of the converts, I know you've bought a couple shirts, but not as bad as the rest of us. You were the big ECW guy. What's your earliest ECW memory?
Oh my God. It was on, they did paid programming. This was probably fall of 96 or spring of 97. And they'd be on at 1 a.m. on like the local WB CW channel on a Saturday night. And I can remember on the first episode I ever watched, the tag team, the Pitbulls, which are these jacked up Steiner brother muscle bound steroid dudes, power bombing Francine, who's, female manager, from the top rope through a table in the ring. And I hadn't seen anything like it in my life. And I went, what in the hell is this? And then you see some of the guys that you do know, like Terry Funk and Paul Heyman and Bam Bam Bigelow, like that. So that was like the combination of just like, okay, I know some of these guys, where have they been, with this new blood of talent of guys that I'd never seen, like Sabu and Rob Van Dam. And, thankfully Philadelphia, even though, we're from Pittsburgh originally, me and you, Jay, like they would tour around us. So, that it just made it grow, knowing that I could see them 15 minutes from my house at the CCBC Golden Dome.
Of course. And I'm sure over the course of the podcast, we'll definitely talk about your ECW adventures. Kevin, what were you just WWE as a kid, or what were you into?
Figured I was WWF, growing up, and then I got into WCW a year before, 2 years before NWO really started, just because I met a lot of kids in high school. They got me into the WCW Starcades, and then that got me going, back and seeing how much I missed throughout the years by not watching that sooner. But I do remember Joe and I have had this discussion prior. Brian, you mentioned ECW is on at like 3 a.m. on Past Sports. And I remember
like Tuesdays,
the biggest thing was, stay up late on the weekends, and it would be like an hour show. You might see one match, but it was a lot of like infomercial type thing. And it was like, I don't remember if it was Francine, but you saw her kind of like doing like stripper type moves.
The night Kawana Monalea danced atop the ECW arena.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. And it's just like, just the camera work. It was, I didn't get to ever see it live, growing up, but it was kind of one of those things where it's like, ooh, is someone watching me when watching this? Like, it's almost like it was kind of cool to experience. But yeah, I was just plain cut kind of WWF kind of guy when I was younger.
I was a big Jim Crockett Promotions, NWA, and then WCW. And if you go to our YouTube channel at ThatWrestlePod, you can see the intro videos we all made, a little bit about us, wrestling, non-wrestling, family stuff. But yeah, I was big into the Four Horsemen and Dusty Road, baby, and just everything about it, because in Pittsburgh, yeah, we got all the WWF programming, but 6:05 on Saturday night, turn to NWA, man, and it's all over the WWE network right now. So that was my big thing, and we'll wrap up this part of the intro show with you, Joe. What were you into as a youth?
As a youth, I was definitely pro WWF. Started off as a little Hulkamaniac, but then I started really getting into Macho Man and Piper. I thought Hogan was going to kind of stale at like 8 years old. I liked the guys he went against more, because Hogan to me was always saying the same thing, but I really was into like the stories of it. I loved watching it. I watched the cartoon, the Hulk Hogan Rockin' Wrestling, which of course I still have on glorious VHS. I still have a working VCR too, because I do. And I did watch NWA WCW on TBS at 6:05 Saturday night, and I enjoyed it because it was still wrestling. I wasn't into it as much because I felt like it was darker. And that was just like, as a kid, I just looked at it as it was darker, not knowing that it was the production value was better at WWF.
Well, I think a lot of that too, Joe, is WWF was the Doinks and the Dumpster Drosy, and like
that's
those
when I
characters.
Stopped watching.
NWA was never like that. They never really had too many gimmicky things until later on, but that's very cool. And so that was a little bit about us and our wrestling fandom. So we're going to get into what this show is about. Now, of course, there are not enough wrestling podcasts out there that we had to put another one out into the world. And we're not journalists. We're not dirt sheet guys. As you can tell, we're just fans. And that's what this podcast is about. The goal is to be as interactive as possible on social media at ThatWrestlePod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a TikTok, but we're kind of slow on that. Always interact with us. Send an email, thatwrestlepod@gmail.com, and YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, please subscribe, leave a comment, tell your friends, and let's, wrestling's fun. So let's have fun together. Now,
don't forget to send that email with the subject of "check these out." You'll be part of the group just like that. No time.
Oh, funny. So one last thing on the email. If you don't want to email, but you want to reach out, if you have a question for the show, topics, things that we're involved with, use the hashtag AskTWP. Get it? That Wrestling Podcast. AskTWP on social media. Hashtag AskTWP. So 3 of us have jobs where wrestling t-shirts are not acceptable in the workplace. And one of us, doesn't really matter what he wears. And over the course of the podcast, we'll let you figure out who is who and, who can wear the shirts to work and who not. But because this is a wrestling podcast, wrestling shirts are mandatory. And the first thing we will do every week on the show is a little segment we like to call, What Are You Wearing?
What are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? What are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today?
This week for the intro, I had to break out my formal wear, my Ted DiBiase suit T-shirt. I picked it up at Pro Wrestling Tees. We talked earlier about the sales, and you can't just buy one. But I thought for week one, I'd go formal, and you can get this at Pro Wrestling Tees. Brian, you've got the classic. You've got a classic shirt this week, right?
I do. It's a big couple of days for these guys. I got the classic black and white that changed the industry, the new world order.
Okay.
Shout out to all the guys going into the hall, and Eric Bischoff as well. Well deserved.
And Joe, another classic. Can't go wrong with the classics.
I'm going with the other black and white with attitude, Austin 316. I'm foreshadowing for a future segment why I chose this one. But, you can't go wrong with the rattlesnake. And everyone, if you're a wrestling fan, you should have some sort of Stone Cold Steve Austin shirt. And I'm saying everyone should have a Stone Cold Steve Austin shirt. And if you may not notice, one of us doesn't belong.
One of these things is not like the other.
Who's the one who doesn't have the Austin 316 shirt?
Now, listen, I will get into the story if you want that I told you guys.
Go for it. Go ahead.
All right. So, listen, I did want a Stone Cold shirt from back in the day. I didn't have the original Austin 316 that everybody has. I admit that. But back in the heyday of the Monday Night Wars, you get like these little catalog in the mail where you could buy wrestling shirts and they'd come to your house in 4 to 6 weeks once you sent in the check, right? It's not how it was.
What's that?
PO Box 48123.
And they had one that, like, on the front, it said Goldberg sucks, and on the back it said Austin rules. Maybe it's I don't remember.
We had those at the mall kiosk where it was like the knockoff wrestling shirts. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
So whatever the catalog was, I ordered it, and they sent me some other random Austin shirt that wasn't the one I wanted. And I sent it. I called them probably and sent it back and said, hey, I want this one instead. And they resent the same shirt. So I just gave up at that point, and that shirt is long to history. So my bad.
If you're listening and you have the Goldberg Sucks Austin Rules t-shirt, send it to let us know. Brian will buy it off of you if it's the right size.
I will redeem myself.
And the reason we're telling this story is a couple weeks ago on 316 Day, as you can see on social media, we all posted an Austin shirt. I had the Ringmaster shirt. Joe had the Austin 316. Kevin, I think you had the Austin 316 shirt. And Brian, you did not participate. So, Kevin, let's move on to what you are wearing this week.
I'm wearing about, a year ago, we were all in Chicago for Revolution and got to see one of the best tag team matches I've ever seen live. Young Bucks Super Kick Party t-shirt. And,
nice.
It's funny. So I was wearing it before we started recording, and I was putting my son to bed, and he's like, looking at it. He's like, "That a New Day shirt, Dad?"
Yeah,
very cartoony looking, and he's just like, "There's eyeballs popping out," and I'm just like, "Close." No, buddy, another tag team. We'll watch them. But yeah, I. Been wanting to wear this shirt for a while. Is one of my new pickups, so great time to wear it tonight.
And if you are wearing a wrestling t-shirt, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, there is a 97.3% chance you're wearing a wrestling t-shirt. Send us a picture on social media. Use the hashtag TWP shirt. TWP shirt hashtag on social media. And if you want to pick up a shirt from this podcast, we have a store available on whatamaneuver.net. Search That Wrestling Podcast. You can pick up a shirt, tank top, hoodie. We got shirts for men, women, kids, even onesies for babies. Not for adults, because that's fucking creepy. Whatamaneuver.net. Search That Wrestling Podcast and buy the shirt!
Buy the shirt!
That Wrestling Podcast presents The 5 Count.
It's the 5 count. It could be the greatest tag teams. It could be the worst gimmicks, greatest failed storylines. Next week for our WrestleMania show, it's going to be our 5-count WrestleManias. And for this week, since this is a show to learn about us and this new show, we thought we would do a 5-count of our favorite matches. Now, these aren't the greatest matches of all time. These are our 5-count favorite matches in the history of professional wrestling. Brian, we'll let you go first this week because I've talked enough right now.
Oh, wow. The honor. Okay. Well, this was fun. It was fun to go back and look back, and it was challenging, but it really boiled down to 6 contenders for a top 5. So very quickly, I'll mention my number 6 is Nature Boy Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels. HBK retires Ric Flair. I'm sorry, I love you. Just like the match, and HBK says that, right? So that's my number 6. But number 5, Foley versus Taker, Hell in a Cell. Never seen anything like it. It's the night that Mick Foley cemented himself as an all-time legend. And really, you go back and watch it, and of course, the throw off the top is the spot you see at every commercial, right? But it's the second one. The second one where he goes through the top of the cage, and the chair hits him in the mouth, and his teeth go up in the nose. That part, when you watch that again, you go, holy shit. And an underrated moment of that match, by the way, guys, you rewatch it, Jim Ross, he makes a call when Terry Funk and all the other officials are checking on Mick Foley. And Undertaker, for whatever reason, choke slams Terry Funk.
Out of his shoes. Right out of his shoes.
That's so off the cuff. It was perfect. So that's always gets me a good laugh.
Brian, that was in Pittsburgh. Were you there?
I was not. No, I can remember where I was. I was in my buddy's basement watching, and being a poor college kid at the time, just didn't have the cash for it.
Gotcha.
But very, very cool nonetheless. So really, my next 2, in theory, are tied for number 3. I couldn't separate, but we'll say one's 4, we'll say one's 3. But it's a flip of a coin. My number 4 is CM Punk versus John Cena, Money in the Bank.
Nice.
This match, the lines were so blurred of what's real and not. What Punk's contract is supposed to expire at midnight. He had the pipe bomb promo a couple weeks earlier. Was that a shoot? Was that a work? All this. The match is in Chicago, Punk's hometown. Every person in the arena is all for CM Punk. It's a rabid fan base. Crowd so into it. And I love the finish. Punk wins after Vince comes down, tries to recreate the Montreal screw job. Cena ends up knocking out John Laurinaitis. Punk hits the GTS, wins. And of course, since it was Money in the Bank, then how cool. Vince comes down, gets on Lawler's headset, and calls for Del Rio to cash in. Punk leaving. And sure enough, Del Rio comes down, Punk kicks him, and that iconic image of Punk hopping the rail to go in the crowd, blowing the kiss.
So good.
The crowd goes nuts as he literally runs to the concourse. So fucking cool. So that's number 4, we'll say. But my number 3, and again, you can flip them depending on what time of day, is Rob Van Dam versus John Cena at One Night Stand. This match at the Hammerstein Ballroom, which was an ECW home base, 2,500 fans, literally all for Rob Van Dam. That pay-per-view goes on the air, and one of the first images is a big banner saying, "If Cena wins, we riot." That's how much this was. And Cena comes out. Thank God he doesn't try to do all his goofy shtick that he would do on a regular show. He knew that they weren't buying it. But he takes off his shirt. He throws it to the crowd, and the crowd throws it right back. And it probably happened 4 or 5 times. So great. The crowd was not having it. And what's fun when I watched this back is Cena was doing heel shit in this match. He put his foot on the ropes for a pin. He knocked out a referee, and I didn't remember that. And I'm like, wow. So that's the lengths he was going to defend his title in this hostile environment. The crowd's just amazing. You can't wrestle. Same old shit.
Same old shit.
Like it was fantastic. Joey Styles and Taz on commentary are great. Edge ends up spearing Cena through a table. RVD 5-star frog splash. Paul Heyman comes out because he's the man, and he pins 1, 2, 3, and RVD wins the title. So
didn't we watch this at your apartment?
That's where I
remember. Yes, and I was over there.
If you guys
okay,
I know I watched it at my Lansing apartment. Correct. Number 2, Triple H for Shawn Michaels in SummerSlam for HBK's first match in over 4 years. This was an unsanctioned anything goes match. HBK comes out, he's in his jeans and cowboy boots. And because he had retired because of back problems, I really remember thinking they're going to protect him and protect his back. But of course, they did the exact opposite, which made every move so cringy. Chairs to the back, whipping him with the belts, back breakers, all this stuff. And I love the moment where HBK sets up Triple H on the outside on a table. He climbs to the top rope and he does one of these, like, I'm fucking crazy. And it's like, holy shit. Yeah, you are. Nails HBK ends up winning by countering the pedigree into a roll-up. So it's kind of a surprise pin. Crowd's going nuts. And about 10 seconds later, Triple H comes from behind, hits him with the sledgehammer in the back. The crowd is going ape shit. JR and King are, in full panic mode of, my God, that son of a bitch. It's so great. HBK wins the match, but Triple H wins the war by doing that as HBK gets carried off on a stretcher. I fucking love that match. I watch that every year, and it kicked off HBK's incredible second run. My number 1, Hulk Hogan versus The Rock at WrestleMania 18. It's icon versus icon, the hottest crowd ever. It's Hogan's first appearance at WrestleMania since WrestleMania 9. And it's so fun because every little thing that happens, the crowd eats it up. Lock up, Hogan throws The Rock down, standing ovation. Like, it's so great. And it's a match that gives me all the feelings of why I fell in love with wrestling as a kid. The moment where Hogan ends up hitting the leg drop and the crowd's going nuts, and JR with my favorite commentary line of all time is he beat Andre the Giant with that move. I mean, if you want to talk about painting the picture of how big this moment is, that's it. I get chills just talking about it right now. Favorite line. Rock ends up winning. Hall and Nash come down and kind of, mess with Hogan. So Rock and Hogan ends up getting rid of those guys. And Hogan must pose, right?
What's interesting about
man?
Yes. What's interesting about that match is I believe that is the first time that the crowd hijacked the show. It dictated that who was over and who wasn't. And, in years since, every WrestleMania crowd tries to take over, especially that fucking night after WrestleMania at Raw. But great 5 count, Brian. We're going to go to Kevin next. What is your 5 count, Kevin? We'll start with you at number 5.
So it slightly mirrors Brian. So Brian had Rock versus Hogan at number 1. I have Rock versus Hogan as my number 5. Very similar, everything Brian mentioned. One thing that highlights my watching the matches even before they even start wrestling is when they're staring at each other and they do the face turn if you're watching on YouTube, and then they do it the other way, and Hogan has that smug look on him, with the beard, and it gave you the goosebumps. And I remember exactly where I was. I was in the dorm at Michigan State. My buddy next door stole the pay-per-view somehow. we watched it on his 32-inch screen or TV, which is like baller style back in 2002. So it was awesome. It was just one of those matches where when I was thinking about it, I'm like, I kind of went on instinct, kind of making my list. I was thinking, okay, I don't really want to think too hard. What comes to mind when I'm thinking best match? So literally earlier today, I was closing my eyes, and that was one of the top 5. I did have a number 6, and I'll save that for last. It almost made it. Number 4, though, is also at a WrestleMania the year before, TLC between the Dudleys, Hardys, and Edge and Christian. Spot Fest. Brutal. By the way, Dudley's with the Z Boys and Hardy Boys. We don't see that very often. Just so many spots. Edge jumping off there. Not to be confused with the great match they also had at SummerSlam. SummerSlam 2000. What was that? A ladder match, I believe. But just that match, is something that never seen before up to that level. And I think all three teams brought it, and the real winners in that match, and everyone who's listening, it's very cliche to say the fans were the real winners in a lot of these matches because, we still talk about that, 15 plus years later, that match. And of course, Edge and Christian are, one of my favorite tag teams of all time. So just seeing all three of those teams go at it. Number 3, very similar to the TLC, but it's just the L, WrestleMania 10, Razor Ramon versus Shawn Michaels ladder match. Right off the bat, Razor Ramon comes out, does like his cool little, shimmy by the ladder. And it's just so many things because Shawn, looking Shawn, so athletic in the Rockers, solo career, he jumps, he flips, he's such a mobile wrestler. But when you looked at Razor, he's one of those guys who are more of a bruiser style, beats him up. And he was doing some things off the ladder too. It was very exciting. Never saw anything like that before. So I was like, ooh, are these people going to get hurt? Because at that point, I was a pretty young guy. I'm like, ooh, don't get hurt. And you're pushing it over. It's like, ooh, is he all right? Now I watch it. I'm like, yeah, kill each other. But it was such a revolutionary event way before its time. WrestleMania 10. That's only 7 years after Hogan, Andre, and Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels were breaking down the house in that ladder match. 2, Undertaker versus Mankind, Hell in the Cell, 1998. Brian, every single note that I have on here basically is what you mentioned. We've been to Hell in the Cell at Joe Louis. We saw Shane take a bump, when Kevin O, or was it Kevin Owens?
LCA.
It was Little Caesars.
Little Caesars. Yes, Little Caesars Arena. But always go back to when, Mankind thankfully landed on that table. Okay, Mick Foley's not the most agile guy, right? It has to take a precise, athletic man to still crash your body on that table. Because you can imagine, what if it was 3 feet off? He might have been dead. A lot of those spots in that damn match, he really could have been injured, tooth up the nose and up the lip and everything. But, and I know a lot of matches have spawned off from Hell in the Cell. There's
been 45 Hell in a Cell matches.
Holy crap. I was going to say 2 or 3 dozen, 45. But the best is that one. And I think it was just original. Mankind at that point, was earlier in his career, when he first came out, he was creepy. He was scary, the music. And at that point, he was kind of becoming a little bit more, I don't want to say hokey, right? But more, talkative and not making the extreme noises and everything. But after that match, it was like, okay, Mick Foley is ridiculous. This guy is bringing it. Number 1, kind of partial to this one wrestler. Joe sporting his shirt today. Still WrestleMania 13, Bret Hart versus Stone Cold I Quit match. Multiple reasons. First thing that you think of, or at least I think of when I watch that match, Stone Cold face all bloody in that sharpshooter, not giving up. Bret Hart, both of them are just going back and forth during the whole match. One of the coolest things during that match, that's when Stone Cold and Bret Hart, they basically flipped, right? One was a face, one was a heel, and it was like the double turn. And after that, Stone Cold just skyrocketed even more to superstardom just because, he didn't. It's weird.
Is that a ghost?
I don't know. It was
not again.
Swoggle? Was that Swoggle under the table there? What's going on?
What?
Okay, for if you're only listening, like I sit about 4 feet away from my bedroom window, and literally it just went like
Ding dong, hello.
weird as shit. Someone must be like next door pounding me.
It's the wrestlers in your number 6 pick who are pissed. Top 5.
Honorable mention.
Let's find out who that is, Kev.
I'm gonna quit this show because I'm getting a little scared. But number 6, I just put Flair's Royal Rumble match. Just
sure.
I was just like, you know what? It almost made that list, and it was like one of my favorite Rumble events of all time. You know, it ranks up there so high, and
that's great.
The promo after from Flair, it almost cracked the top 5, but it was one of those ones that I thought of immediately. But yep, 5 through 1. Number 1, Stone Cold versus Bret Hart, that I Quit match.
Great 5 count, Kevin. I'll go next with my 5 because that's what we were supposed to pick. 5. Number 5. Number 5. February 25th, 2013, Monday Night Raw. Yours truly was in the second row. And if you watch, you can see the back of my Steeler hat most of the night. It is John Cena against CM Punk. Now, the backstory, John Cena had just won the Royal Rumble, and he was on his way to face The Rock for the WWE title at WrestleMania. This would be Rock Cena 2, and Punk felt slighted. So the lead up was this match determined who was going to face The Rock. And to be there in the second row, the match was just fucking outstanding. So February 25th, 2013, Monday Night Raw. Go check it out. Hopefully when you're listening to this, the network hasn't fully transformed over to Peacock yet. It'll still be there now, today, April 2nd. But that is my number 5. Number 4 is October 5th, 1997. The Bad Blood pay-per-view. It is the first Hell in a Cell match. Undertaker and HBK. Now, a few months prior, Shawn Michaels was the guest referee between The Undertaker and Bret Hart. Shawn Michaels cost The Undertaker the title. And they wrestled a match, Shawn and Taker, at Ground Zero. It went to a no contest. And to put an end to the feud, they had to go to Hell. Hell in a Cell. It was the first one ever. And it was such a great match. And it's also the debut of Kane, The Undertaker's brother. So number 4 is the first Hell in a Cell match, Undertaker and HBK from Bad Blood. Now, this is going to show my age a little bit. I'm the oldest of the 4.
George Hackenschmidt versus... Sorry.
No, this is... actually, this could be a fun conversation. July 4th, 1987. How old were you, Brian? Because that's your birthday.
I'd be 8 years old that beautiful day.
The match beyond, the first War Games match from NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions. It was the 4 Horsemen and J.J. Dillon against the Road Warriors, Paul Ellering, Nikita Koloff, and the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, baby. Dusty Rhodes created War Games. And this isn't like the watered-down NXT version of War Games that there is now. There was a roof on the cage, and the only way you could win, you had to make your opponent surrender, not give up, not tap out, not a pinfall, surrender. And, of course, J.J. Dillon surrendered, which kind of lame, but, the weakest of the team, had to take the L. But, yeah, July 4th, War Games. It was in Atlanta, Georgia at the Great American Bash. That's my number 3. Now, my number 2, what?
You could throw it out there. I was 5.5.
But your birthday isn't July 4th. That was the whole point. Come on, Kevin, play along. Read the room, brother. Read the room. So number 2.
Who counts half birthdays anyway? Come on.
It's a full birthday. Brian's birthday is on July 4th.
Exactly. Come on, Kevin.
Yeah. So my number 2 is from the September 4th, 2009 edition of SmackDown. John Morrison against Rey Mysterio. It was an IC title match. Morrison wins his third IC title. And I remember watching this on TV and I couldn't believe what I was seeing because this was on TV. This was a pay-per-view quality match on television. And then it showed up on the John Morrison DVD. Remember those? So, John Morrison, Rey Mysterio. And this is when John Morrison was a badass, not the goofy sidekick that he's playing now with the weird haircut.
Oh, that haircut. That's something else, man. You're right.
September 4th, 2009 edition of SmackDown. And my number one, July 17th, 2011. Money in the Bank pay-per-view, CM Punk against John Cena. Now, of course, this is a result of the pipe bomb. Punk's unhappy. He didn't get ice cream bars or his face on the cup or the program. And he was going to win the title and leave. And he did. The match is outstanding. Brian, you touched on the finish with him blowing the kiss to Vince.
Yeah. It's great.
YouTube Punk's entrance.
Yeah.
I have never heard a pop that loud. And it went on. There's a video on YouTube dedicated to just this. It's 6 minutes from the time the Kill Switch Engage song hits. I think that's who sang his original.
That's right. Yep.
And then all the way until Cena hit. It was 6 minutes, and it was unbelievable. Number one for my 5 count is John Cena, CM Punk, Money in the Bank, 2011. And wrapping up our 5 count for this week, Joe, what do you have as your 5 count?
Well, here's my 5 and only 5 because I also paid attention to the rules. Kevin, I think that noise that was coming from your house was my thunder that you were constantly stealing every time you were talking about your list. And you're going to find out why. And it's like, are you kidding me? All right, here we go.
About the old WCW show, Thunder?
Thursday Night Thunder?
Yeah, Norman Smiley is facing
Hacksaw right now. Any building in the country.
Oh, man. All right, so here we go. Number 5. And I'm just going based off memory here for dates because, Jason, you kept saying dates. March 17th, 2002. WrestleMania.
Preparation, Joe. Don't mock my style. Don't criticize.
Hate to tell you, but the date is correct. March 17th, 2002, WrestleMania 18. Rock Hogan was my number 5.
Cool.
Reason why. It would have been higher if JR wasn't trying to play off the crowd was split at the beginning. He was totally trying to say, "Oh, the crowd split," and I'm watching it going, "No, they're not. They're all Hogan. They're not split."
It was like 80-20
and
Hogan.
Kevin, you mentioned the turning side to side, and you could tell Hogan was smiling because he's like, you know how bad of a exit he had at WCW. So him having the crowd, the Hulkamaniacs, being on his side, that meant way more to him than The Rock. And I can't wait to see what it looks like in the Chris Hemsworth movie. They got to have that included in there.
This is his early days. That's not about wrestling.
I know, but it's like I wish they would have that moment in there because that's a perfect ending.
Maybe the sequel, brother.
Yes, sequel, brother. Okay, so that's my number 5. I don't have to mention anything else because it was already mentioned twice. Number 4, Brian, Kevin, again, mentioned it again. June 28th, 1998, King of the Ring, Hell in the Cell, Foley, Undertaker. And for all the same reasons, but I'm only just going to say one last thing. It's the one match whenever anyone in my family would say, "How can you watch that stuff? It's so fake." I can't
predetermined, bro, not fake.
It is predetermined sports entertainment. And every time I just turn that on and going like, "You telling me that's fake? You telling me you can do that?" And Kevin, you said that he's not the most agile guy. He's way more agile than any of us. So we couldn't do it.
And The Sopranos isn't real either.
Exactly. It's entertainment. My number 3 was not mentioned by anyone, thankfully. I don't know the date, so I'm not going to say it. WrestleMania 25, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker. One of the greatest matches, obviously third greatest match I've ever seen. Just the moment that makes me go wow was when Shawn kicked out of the tombstone. and Undertaker's look resting on his hip going, and
was that the first match or the second match?
It was the first one.
Okay.
And it also takes me back too, because we're also saying for like memories, Brian, I was watching it with him at B-Dubs, and Brian jumped off his stool like he was told by Maury Povich that you're not the father, because he jumped off and went, oh, and he was running around the bar.
No, really? You did that?
I mean, I definitely remember jumping off the bar. I mean, jumping off my bar stool and like being like this for like 2 minutes.
He was running around like it's like, you are Brian, you are not the father, and he was just like, oh.
Wait, did you really run around the bar?
I don't remember that, but
he was running.
It's his 5 count, so let him roll.
He didn't run around the entire. He ran around like our area. Like he jumped off his stool and was running in a circle, going, oh. So
Brian was really into those woodchuck ciders at that time, so maybe.
Oh shit!
Every time I watch that match now, and when the kick out happens, I just think of Brian going, "You are not the father," and he just runs around. But the match was almost perfect. Number 2, WrestleMania 3, 1987. Ricky Steamboat, Randy Macho Man Savage. Sure. It is a clinic of like just pure wrestling match, and just hearing the background of it from all like the documentaries that you see, how Randy Savage had everything planned out to a T. The crowd was hot for it. Even having George the Animal Steel and Elizabeth having their little thing, that gave you the sports entertainment part of it. But Steamboat and Savage just put on a wrestling clinic back and forth. If it wasn't for this next match, it would still be the match that like stands the test of time for me. And number 1, 1997, WrestleMania 13, the match that brought me back to wrestling. I Quit, Stone Cold versus Bret Hart. I stopped watching wrestling after WrestleMania 7. I thought it was getting too cheesy. And I just I didn't care about the next generation. I didn't care about Duke the Dumpster or Repo Man or any of the Dr. Isaac Yankem. I just thought it was corny. It was cheesy. I was done with it. And then I was called over to my friend's house on a Sunday, and they're like, we're watching WrestleMania 13. And I'm like, oh, how can you watch that fake stuff? And predetermined. Don't say that. But that match is what got me, because Austin bleeding, but it's like it was the double turn, and I knew who Bret Hart was. I'm like, oh, I remember him. He's a tag
Hart Foundation guy. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, so blah blah blah. And like when Austin came out and the glass broke, I'm like, okay, this guy seems like a badass. So I was hooked, and it was the first WrestleMania where I said I have to watch Raw tomorrow, and from there I haven't stopped. So number 1, based on bringing me back into the fold, Stone Cold versus Bret Hart, I Quit match, WrestleMania 17, and the blood soaked on the mat too. Perfect.
And that was the 5 count. We do it every week. We'll pick a random topic. And like I said, this week it was all about our 5 count favorite matches of all time. And next week we're back with our 5 count WrestleMania.
Who made your 5 count? Let us know on social media using the hashtag TWP5count.
This is who we are. This is what That Wrestling Podcast will be about. And we're looking forward to doing this every Friday. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, everywhere you get your podcast. But before we go, we got to do the podcaster thing. Joe, where can people find you on social media?
That would be on Twitter at TWPJT.
Are you sure?
I'm not. So why don't you go to me first? Go to someone else, because I have to look it up, because it's not my normal
Kevin. Whatever. Way to be prepared. All right, Kevin, since Joe's not prepared or paying attention, where can people find you on social media?
My Twitter handle is at TWP_Kevin.
And Brian?
I want to know, did somebody already take at TWP Kevin? Why is there an underscore? Did we kick another Kevin off the show beforehand, but he still has Twitter? I don't know. But nevertheless, you can find me on Twitter at TWP Brian, Brian.
And Joe, are you ready to say what your social media handles are?
Yes, I am ready. You can find me on Twitter at TWP_JT.
There it is. There it is. I'm at the Pod General on Twitter and Instagram. Don't forget to follow the show at ThatWrestlePod, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back next Friday, and we want to thank We Are Wasted for our entrance music, Dangerous Darren for the voiceovers, and you for listening to That Wrestling Podcast, because we are out of time.
Thanks for listening. Follow That WrestlePod on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
1, 2, 3, that's it!